Welcome back to the Florida Airport Development Symposium Computer-Based Trainings. The Florida Aviation Professionals Academy, or FAPA, has held 5 full courses and 1 pilot course. Across all courses, the feedback has been very clear. Participants regularly request further information on funding. In fact, funding is the #1 topic participants select to learn more about. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Florida is a unique state when it comes to aviation and airport funding. Florida has the largest aviation grant program of any state in the country, and the state's 100 National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, or NIPIS, airports are also eligible for federal funding. Put together, this means that chances are your local airport is eligible for state and or local funding, depending on what type of airport it is and what type of the project needs funding. Funding airports, like funding other types of infrastructure such as roads and rail, is subject to conditions and provisions. The more local communities are aware of how airport funding operates, the more local communities can benefit. Are you ready to learn more about the state and the federal funding of Florida airports? Let's get started.
As stated in a previous CBT, Florida is home to 130 public use airports. 100 of these airports are in the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, or NIPIS. NIPIS airports are considered part of the National Airport System, serve a defined role in that system, and are eligible for federal funding under the Airport Improvement Program, or AIP. Before exploring federal funding further, this CBT will begin with state funding eligibility and an overview of the FDOT work program. The FDOT Aviation Office calculates distributions of state funding based on 2 aviation program categories, as defined by state law. These include the Airport Aviation Development Program, which received around $158 million in funding for fiscal year 2025, and the Discretionary Capacity Improvement Program, which received around $31 million in funding for fiscal year 2025. Airport Aviation Development Program funding is distributed to all 7 districts, who are in turn responsible for distributing funding to their airports. All public-operated, public-use airports are eligible for this program's funding. Discretionary Capacity Improvement Program funding is distributed to the 7 discretionary capacity designated airports located across 5 FDOT districts. There are very few airports eligible for discretionary capacity improvement funds, and airports that are so designated must meet a set of strict criteria. Currently, the only eligible airports include Southwest Florida International Airport, Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, Orlando International Airport, Melbourne International Airport, Orlando Sanford International Airport, Miami International Airport, and Tampa International Airport. These programs are funded by the FDOT work program. The work program is a 5-year plan developed and maintained to maximize the department's production and service capabilities. Work program funding is used to pay the cost of public transportation projects and projects on the Florida Strategic Intermodal System, including projects at the airports. Airports must have their projects in their capital improvement section of their approved master plan, as well as uploaded in the Joint Automated Capital Improvement Program, or JACIP, Florida's aviation-specific capital improvement program, in order to have a project funded through the work program. These projects are submitted and reviewed by FDOT District Aviation Office coordinators and are used to develop the tentative work program, which ultimately becomes the adopted work program. While there are more details and intricacies to getting an airport project funded by the FDOT work program, the main takeaway for local governments should be this: a project must be pre-planned and coordinated with FDOT district office in order to potentially be funded. Airport projects may also receive federal funding if they are in the NIPIS, and therefore eligible for AIP funding. The NIPIS contains all commercial service airports and select public-operated general aviation airports.
In addition to being granted to an airport that is included in the NIPIAS, projects must meet certain eligibility requirements in order to receive AIP funding. Eligible projects include those improvements related to enhancing airport safety, capacity, security, and the environmental concerns. The FAA must be able to determine that the projects are justified based on aeronautical demand, and projects must also meet federal, environmental, and procurement requirements. State and federal funding provide for the majority of a project's cost, leaving only a small amount left for local funding, or what is called the local match. The local match varies based on 4 factors: whether federal funding is available, whether the airport is a commercial service or GA airport, the project type, and the airport location. When federal funding is available for a project at a commercial service airport, FDOT may provide up to 50% of the local share of project costs. For instance, the FAA may provide up to 75% of a project's cost, leaving 25%. Of this 25%, FDOT will pay up to 50% or 12.5%, leaving a local match of 12.5%. When federal funding is not available for a project at a commercial service airport, FDOT still provides 50% of total project costs. Therefore, using the same example, FDOT would provide up to 50% and the local match would also be 50%. When federal funding is available for a project at a general aviation airport, FDOT may provide up to 80% of the local share of project costs. For instance, the FAA may provide up to 90% of a project's funding, leaving 10%. Of this 10%, FDOT will pay 80% or 8% of the total cost, and the local match is thus 2%. When federal funding is available for a project at a general aviation airport, FDOT may provide up to 80% of the local share of project costs. Therefore, using the same previous example, FDOT would provide 80% of project costs and the local match would be 20%. Finally, if an airport is located in a Rural Economic Development Initiative or REDI community, the local match may be reduced or waived. REDI counties include those highlighted in the map. REDI counties are also eligible to receive additional grants from the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, as seen in this example from Marietta Municipal Airport.
One of the biggest things that we're very proud of and that we were fortunate under Governor Scott was the Governor's Job Growth Grant money.
Yes.
We were successful at twisting Governor Scott's arm, and he was generous enough to approve a $2 million grant for the city of Marietta to extend our north-south runway 1836 from 5,000 feet to 6,000 feet.
Game changer right there.
It is. We think it is too, and you're a former airport manager yourself, so the 6,000 foot we think means a lot to us. So that is probably one of the biggest things. We've got some other things coming as it relates to the apron renovation projects and some other things, but the extension of that runway is a big game changer for us.
Absolutely. That's going to kind of allow you to maybe revisit your design aircraft and your master plan and allow larger aircraft to come in and out of here and land because of the extended runway.
When an airport accepts a grant, that acceptance comes with a requirement to adhere to grant assurances. A grant assurance is a condition that an airport sponsor agrees to comply with in order to receive grant funds. Both the FAA and the FDOT Aviation Office have grant assurances, which require airports to be maintained and operated in a safe and efficient manner and to comply with specific conditions. Federal grant assurances are applicable to those airports that have accepted FAA funds, while FDOT assurances are applicable to those airports that have accepted grants through the FDOT Aviation Grant Program. Both types of grant assurances apply to airports who have accepted both types of funding, although there are overlaps in the two set of grants assurances, as we will explore later. Grant assurances are applicable for the following durations: 20 years after acceptance of the grant, the useful life of the facility, if less than 20 years, and in perpetuity for exclusive rights, airport revenue, civil rights, or real property acquisition. Failure to maintain and operate the airport in compliance with federal and/or state grant assurances jeopardizes an airport's eligibility for future funding.
There are 39 federal grant assurances required for federally obligated airports. These assurances serve many purposes, from having a Disadvantaged Business Enterprises or DBE program in place to ensuring that the airport facility continues to be operated as an airport. One of the most important grant assurances is keeping the airport operational and open for the useful life of the facilities. For pavement, this is 20 years, and for land acquisition, this is in perpetuity. Please note that if your airport is ineligible for federal funds due to grant assurance violations, then it is also ineligible for state funds. A list of the 39 grant assurances has been provided. There are also 24 state grant assurances. Airport projects receiving Aviation Grant Program funding also obligate airport sponsors to comply with the grant assurances contained within each state grant. There are several overlaps between federal grant assurances and state grant assurances, so if your airport has received both federal and state funding, please keep this in mind. A list of the 24 grant assurances has been provided. Non-compliance with federal and/or state grant assurances can have major ramifications for the project at your airport. In egregious circumstances, non-compliance can result in grant funding suspended for ongoing projects, known as stop work, or even an FDOT taking action to recover historical funds provided to the sponsor. Airport sponsors and their local communities should be knowledgeable about how to remain in compliance with grant assurances, which, remember, can last for up to in perpetuity, before accepting federal and/or state grants.
A special appropriation refers to a one-time allocation of funding for a particular purpose that is approved by the state legislature. In the context of state aviation funding, a special appropriation refers to funding allocated for an airport project as requested specifically by a legislator. This airport project could have already been included in the AIP and/or work program, or it could be a brand new airport project. The 1990 Florida legislature passed a law in an effort to discourage the identification of specific projects in the Appropriations bill. In part, the law states the following: please keep in mind that the law references specific appropriations, which is synonymous with special appropriations. The adopted work program may include only those projects submitted as part of the tentative work program, plus any projects that are separately identified by specific appropriation. However, any FDOT transportation project which is identified by specific appropriation shall be deducted from the funds annually distributed to the respective district. Of special note, should a specific appropriation be vetoed by the governor, that project cannot be funded by FDOT during the fiscal year for which the specific appropriation was requested. Before requesting airport project funding through special appropriations, there are a few important considerations. First, if funding for a new airport project is requested through special appropriations and approved, that funding must be reallocated from other sources. Frequently, that funding is reallocated within the work program, and funding is diverted from other airports within the same district as the airport that received the special appropriation, or even from other districts. This means that other airports will not receive funding that had been planned for them, and that the FDOT district offices must rework their work program. Second, if funding for an airport project that is already in the work program is requested through special appropriations and not approved, then the FDOT district office in charge of that airport also won't commit money towards the project in the work program. Therefore, if an airport sponsor seeks funding through the work program and through special appropriations, they may jeopardize receiving any funding at all. In general, the FDOT Aviation Office encourages seeking funding for airport projects through the work program. This ensures proper airport planning, both on the airport-by-airport basis and Florida's aviation system as a whole.
Aviation funding is a complex issue because it operates on numerous levels. First, At the airport level, in order for an airport project to be funded, it must be included in that airport master plan. The airport sponsor should work with their local community in order to ensure that the proposed project is compatible with local community development. Second, and at the state level, the majority of Florida's airports are eligible for state funding. State-funded projects must be in the FDOT approved plan, in JSIP, and must be coordinated with FDOT district offices in order to receive work program funding. Thirdly, and at the federal level, the majority of Florida's airports are also eligible for federal funding. Airport sponsors must be approved for AIP-eligible projects. Oh, and don't forget your local match and the project grant assurances. And should you seek special appropriation for your project, as this CBT has illustrated, there are many components to consider when seeking out funding for your next airport project. The FDOT Aviation Office is a partner in this endeavor, so please don't hesitate to include us in the planning process early on. We are happy to be of assistance.